offer what they can. The tree stumps were the substitute of Hussein's home that had been destroyed during the war that raged in Bosnia from 1992 to 1995. One night, Hussein told us, Serb troops had streamed down the hill. They were burning houses, torching houses. They were shooting the villagers who screamed and ran away. Fortunately, Hussein and Fatima and their son did get away. And after months of wandering, they ended up as refugees in Germany, only to be told after 3 years that they had to go elsewhere. So instead of coming to the United States, as friends of mine in Northern Virginia did, they went back home to Banovici in the hope that they could rebuild their home. Because most of the drivers did not speak English, we supervisors were not able to stay in touch with them as well as we did with our interpreters. At the end of my stay, Hussein and I said a sad farewell as I boarded the bus to leave. 2 years later, I was in Tuzla with my friend Suzanne. We planned to take a bus to Sarajevo and then to Mostar, and then we would fly home. Suzanne had left luggage with a Bosnian friend, so we took a taxi to try to retrieve the luggage and found that the driver couldn't locate the house. So we asked him to drop us at the sidewalk across from the bus station, the intercity bus station, and we would use a telephone. So as we stood there waiting for the traffic to pass, Suzanne said to me, "Barbara, that man." I turned around and looked, and I gaped, and he gaped. "Barbara? Hussein? Barbara? Hussein?" Indeed, it was my old friend, Hussein. We joined him and Fatima at their table. She was going to visit relatives and was waiting for the bus. What a coincidence and what a pleasure it was to see both of them. Luckily, Suzanne spoke German. So we had a grand reunion, and Hussein drove us to Sarajevo. So while he and Suzanne talked in the car, German I couldn't understand, I began thinking about him and Fatima and the Bosnian people. And I wondered if I could write about their tragedy and their endurance. And I knew that whatever I wrote would have to include a wife like Fatima, husbands, fathers, brothers, sisters, mothers, cousins, because families are so very, very important in the Balkans. I discovered how important they are on my first trip there in 1996, when I accompanied a friend to Zagreb, Croatia, where she was going to visit with her uncle and aunt and cousins. And at that time, I knew little about the 1990 war that had occurred in breaking up of Yugoslavia. I had agonized over scenes on television of that marvelous city Dubrovnik on the Adriatic, the walled city. But while my friend Nada went to visit someone, I flew to Dubrovnik, where her uncle and aunt were very kind to me and welcomed an American who was very interested in their region and in their history. They took me to a tiny village nearby from which Lucinda's mother had fled during the shelling. I felt sick as I gazed in horror at the remains of houses. There was nothing left but stubs of walls. I stood in doorless doorways looking at smashed chairs, the remains of a refrigerator, a doll. Little did I know that those scenes would be endlessly repeated for me in Bosnia later. Another preview to my Balkan adventures was when Nada's cousins drove us to Plitvice, a marvelous ecological treasure of pools and waterfalls. At that time in 1996, we were strongly warned not to walk off the boarded walkways because there were landmines still there. On the way, we drove through Karlovac, and people were working on their houses, and the checkerboard Croatian flag was displayed everywhere. I thought it was a holiday. But I found out later that it was because houses that the Croatians had confiscated from the Serbs who had been expelled were being renovated. That expulsion was called Operation Storm, and it occurred in 1995, just before the war ended. I had no idea then that I would have an opportunity later to write about those Serbs and about their situation. And so I was introduced to the Balkans, and I wanted to go back. Someone told me about a man at the State Department who was recruiting Americans for elections there. So I called him and I talked to him, and he said, well, I have 3,000 resumes sitting here on my desk, but what the heck, send yours in. So I figured later, after I was selected, that it must have landed on top. And I did get to go to Bosnia again. When I sent in my resume, I didn't have a clue what the OSCE was. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe was established by the Helsinki Final Act in 1975. Today, it has 56 member states, ranging from Vancouver to Vladivostok. Its primary missions are early warning, conflict prevention, crisis management, and post-conflict rehabilitation in Europe. In Bosnia then, and elsewhere since, the OSCE's responsibilities are to oversee elections to assure that they are free and fair. Now, you know by now that I love to travel, and I found Bosnia's mountains and valleys and rivers spectacular. Luckily, in my 6 assignments there, I was sent to 6 different locations, learning the geography and some of the language. The country is correctly called Bosnia and Herzegovina, or BIH. The Herzegovina part is in the southwest, and its capital is Mostar. Following the September election in 1997, some Americans went by bus to Dubrovnik. We went through Sarajevo, seeing the famous yellow Holiday Inn, the Sniper's Alley, and those Sarajevo roses that were created by the shells that landed on the sidewalk and then painted a pink color. In Mostar, we stopped for lunch and we gazed sorrowfully at the stones in the river. The stones were from the 16th century bridge that had been shelled to bits. When I returned to Mostar in 2005, I was able to walk across the rebuilt bridge. There are some photographs, maybe some of you have seen, of some of these things that are in my album over here. My first election job was in Tuzla. Tuz means salt in Turkish, just one of the hints of the 400-year occupation by the Ottoman Empire. In Tuzla, there's a small public square where my friends and I enjoyed having drinks at an outdoor cafe. Friends enjoyed having drinks there on a delightful spring evening in 1995 until a shell landed in their midst.